Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in, because today we're really diving deep into a topic I know a lot of you are interested in, those long-distance relationships.
Definitely a hot topic. And you've been sharing some fascinating stuff with me, especially that lecture on making LDRs work.
Yeah, that one really got me thinking, and honestly, it had some pretty surprising points in there, even some back and forth about whether distance can actually be good for love.
It definitely challenged some assumptions. I mean, even just defining long distance isn't as straightforward as you'd think.
That's true, I hadn't really considered that. So, just how far apart do two people have to be before it counts as long distance? What makes it long anyway?
Right, the lecture really dug into that. It's not always about the actual miles, more about the effort involved in being together face to face. Like, if it takes a full day of travel just to see each other for a few hours, that can feel pretty long, even if it's not across the world.
That makes total sense when you put it that way. It's not just about being in different cities, it's the whole impact on your life, you know?
Absolutely. It's about how much distance disrupts your daily routine, your ability to just be spontaneous. And the lecture brought up something really interesting. Over 3 million married couples in the U.S. are currently in LDRs.
Whoa, seriously, I had no idea it was that common. That's a whole lot of people making it work.
Yeah, and it really shows that this isn't some niche thing anymore. It's a growing part of how relationships look these days. Like, it's not just young love or college sweethearts anymore. It's folks from all walks of life.
And probably for all sorts of reasons, right? I mean, think about it. Job opportunities, taking people to different places, families spread across the globe.
Hmm.
It's a different world than it used to be.
Exactly. The lecture highlighted how globalization plays a huge role, but also just changing attitudes, like
Yeah.
maybe people are more open to different ways of doing relationships now.
That makes sense. But we can't talk about long distance without bringing up the elephant in the room. Or should I say, the smartphone in our pockets.
Oh, absolutely. Technology is a huge part of this conversation, game changer in so many ways. But whether it's for better or worse, that's up for debate.
Right, because on the one hand, we've got constant communication, video calls, instant messaging. It's easier than ever to stay in touch. But is it always a good thing? The lecture actually presented some pretty compelling arguments on both sides.
That was fascinating, wasn't it? Technology is this double-edged sword for long-distance love.
It really is. It can be a lifeline for sure, helping you feel connected despite the distance.
Yeah, but on the other hand, is it creating this false sense of intimacy? Are couples relying on technology so much that they're not actually addressing the real challenges of being apart?
That's such a good point. It's just because you're constantly texting doesn't mean you're actually communicating on a deeper level, right?
Exactly. And that's what made the lecture so thought-provoking. It really pushed us to consider both the pros and cons of this tech-driven world we're living in, especially when it comes to love and relationships.
And it makes you think it's about more than just logistics and stuff, right? Long distance, it's a whole different emotional roller coaster.
It really is. The lecture actually talked about how our individual attachment styles can really impact how we handle the ups and downs of an LDR.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It mentioned something about a love hangover. I was like, what is that?
Right. So picture this.
Yeah.
You've had this amazing visit with your partner, right? You're on cloud nine, but then the trip ends, you say goodbye, and suddenly, bam, you're hit with this wave of sadness, almost like a withdrawal.
Yeah.
That's the love hangover.
Wow, it's kind of like those bittersweet goodbyes at the airport, but amplified times 1,000.
Exactly. It's that mix of joy from being together, but also that pang of sadness knowing you're heading back to being apart.
Mhm.
And, the lecturer pointed out, it can hit people differently depending on their attachment style.
That makes sense. I guess some people are just naturally better at handling distance than others.
It's not always about being better at it, but more about how distance interacts with our individual needs and anxieties. Like someone with a secure attachment style, they're comfortable with intimacy, but they also value their independence.
So for them, maybe the distance isn't as overwhelming.
Exactly. They can enjoy the time together, but they're also okay with things going back to normal when they're apart. But then you have someone with an anxious attachment style.
Who might be more prone to those love hangovers.
Absolutely. The distance might amplify their fears of abandonment, make them crave more reassurance, more contact. It can be a recipe for more insecurity.
And on the flip side, wouldn't someone with an avoidant attachment style actually almost prefer the distance?
It's definitely possible. They might thrive in an LDR because it gives them that space they crave. But again, it all goes back to understanding not just your own attachment style, but also your partner's.
So you can anticipate those potential challenges and I guess communicate better about them.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those patterns,
Mhm.
being self-aware, and then having those open and honest conversations about your needs and expectations. And that's especially crucial in long-distance relationships where you don't have those everyday cues and reassurances.
Like, you have to be extra intentional about communication, right?
You got it. Because miscommunication can spiral so quickly when you're not face-to-face. You miss those subtle cues, those little gestures that say so much.
Communication is key. Absolutely. And what I appreciated is that the lecture wasn't just all this like theoretical stuff.
Hmm.
It actually gave some really practical advice, from couples who are out there making long distance work for them.
Yeah, they definitely didn't shy away from the real-life stuff, did they? Like, they really stressed how important those early conversations are before you're even officially long distance, like setting those expectations right off the bat.
Oh, right from the get-go, like laying down the ground rules kind of thing.
Exactly. Because, those conversations can be tricky, right? So it's about getting ahead of potential issues, being on the same page.
Makes sense. So what kind of things, like how often you're going to talk, what's the deal with visits, are those the kinds of things you mean?
Absolutely. Things like that. Communication frequency, visit schedules, even like how much will you share about your day-to-day lives with each other. Those are all important things to figure out. And of course, we can't forget about technology, right? It plays a huge role in LDRs these days.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like a whole new world compared to how long distance used to be.
Right. And the lecture made a great point about using it wisely, like as a tool to really enhance your connection, not just to check in or whatever.
That's where those creative ideas come in, right? I remember they were talking about shared playlists, like building this soundtrack to your relationship. So cool.
Yeah, I loved that one. It's about finding those unique ways to connect, to share experiences, even when you're apart.
And what about those apps designed for LDR couples? Have you seen those? The ones where you can like watch movies together or even send virtual hugs? It's
Yeah,
amazing.
absolutely. There's some seriously innovative stuff out there. But again, it comes back to intentionality. It's not just about being glued to your phone 24/7. It's about choosing those moments, those activities that bring you closer together, even virtually. Like, remember Jake and Mia from the lecture?
Yeah.
They planned those incredible date weekends.
Oh, yeah. They really went all out, turning their visits into these mini adventures, exploring each other's cities and
It
everything.
was awesome. They showed that it's not just about being in the same room, it's about actively creating those shared experiences, even if it's just for a short time.
It's like they made the most of every single visit, squeezed every drop of fun out of it.
Hmm?
Reminds me of something you were telling me about with your own.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of making the most of it, we were planning this whole trip around, but anyway, I digress. It's about being intentional, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
But it's not just about those big visits, right? It's those little things, too, that can make such a difference. The lecture touched on that, like sending a good morning text or.
Oh, yeah, just those little gestures to show you're thinking of each other. Like, you see a funny meme that reminds you of them, you send it their way. Or even something as simple as mailing a handwritten letter, you know? A little something to brighten their day.
It's like, it's those little reminders that you're still there, even when you're physically apart. But the lecture also talked about something that I found really interesting about the importance of independence in long distance relationships.
Yeah, that's a big one. It's about finding that balance, right? Like nurturing your own interests, your friendships, your goals, all that stuff, while still staying connected as a couple.
That makes sense, but it sounds kind of tricky. Like, how much independence is too much? Could focusing on your own life make you drift apart?
It's definitely a conversation to have. Figure out what works for both of you. Like, does independence mean having separate hobbies? Or is it more about feeling confident and secure in yourself, even when your partner's not around?
So many different ways to look at it.
Exactly. And it's something that might evolve over time too, right? Like what works at the
Mm.
beginning of an LDR might feel different a year or two down the line. And speaking of evolving, that lecture got me thinking about how technology is changing everything. Like they even touched on virtual reality dates. Could you imagine?
It's like straight out of a sci-fi movie. I think they mentioned a company, VTime XR, I think it's called. They're developing these immersive virtual experiences specifically for couples.
Yeah, it's wild. Like imagine putting on a headset and suddenly you're both transported to a beach in Bali.
Uh-huh.
It makes you wonder, what's the future of long distance going to look like?
Right. Like, if technology keeps advancing at this rate, will distance even be a thing anymore?
Fascinating to think about. But even with all the cool tech stuff, I think the biggest question for most couples is still, can distance really be sustainable in the long run? The lecture didn't shy away from that either.
Yeah, there were definitely some different viewpoints on that. It's like some experts say it's setting yourself up for heartbreak, while others are like, no, it can actually strengthen your bond because you're choosing each other every single day.
It's that whole absence makes the heart grow fonder idea,
Yep.
right?
Right. Though I do remember that story from the lecture about Rachel and her boyfriend. They had this countdown timer on their phones for when they'd finally get to be together again. It was their shared goal.
That shared vision is so important. Whether it's a timeline for closing the distance, or a plan for eventually living in the same city, or even just a dream you're both working towards, it gives you something to look forward to, something to work towards together.
It's like, it's not just about surviving the distance, it's about using that time apart to build something even stronger, right?
Absolutely. And that's what I took away from all of this. It's that long distance relationships, they're not for the faint of heart. They take work, they take communication, and a whole lot of creativity. But for those who are willing to put in the effort.
It can be so worth it.
Exactly. And who knows, as our world keeps changing, maybe the whole idea of long distance will change right along with it.
That's a thought. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, and I hope this has given everyone listening some food for thought, whether you're currently navigating an LDR, thinking about taking the plunge, or just curious about this whole world of love and distance.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating topic, and I think there's still so much to learn and explore.
Definitely. Well, that's it for our deep dive today. Thanks for joining us.